you see all your people who've been, they're in different roles now, and everybody, like whether it be Aurora or other places who've worked for you, they've all gone on to bigger and better things. And you're like, that's really cool. And you build this network, and you can say like, I influenced these people's careers in the same way that other people influence mine. And I think that's one of the best parts of being a manager, right?
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of The Executive. For those joining for the first time, this is a podcast where we interview some of the best founders, investors, and operators on their life lessons and advice on how to make it at the highest level. Today, we are absolutely interviewing someone who has reached that level. We are with the CFO of Kois Institute, which is an AI-driven data analysis company specializing in advanced automated enterprise systems. Prior to that, he was at Aurora, which he joined at the Series B stage and then took them public via SPAC. And then before that, he was at Lyft, Meta, Microsoft, amongst many other roles. We are with Richard Tame. So good to have you here, and excited to dig in.
Thanks very much for having me, Matt. Really pleased to be here, and thanks for everyone for tuning in.
Well, we got so many things to talk about with your experience, at Aurora, at Meta, at Lyft, and the list goes on and on. But, first, let's start up with a little bit about your background. Where are you from, and where did your career all start?
Yeah, thanks. So maybe you can tell from my very strong accent, but I'm from England originally. So there's a small town in the northeast of England called Newcastle upon Tyne. Newcastle United's the football team, and that's football with a round ball for American audience. Now the richest football club in the world. But that's kind of where I was born, grew up, went to university, and then moved down to London, worked at British Airways, and then ended up in the US. But yeah, I still retain that Newcastle accent, especially when you go home. It's important to be able to talk with the accent to keep in with the locals, avoid getting punched in the face, that kind of thing.
It's important. Yeah. When you go back, they're like, you're still one of us. You haven't totally changed. Yeah. Well, you started a lot of your career, like you said, at British Airlines in aviation. And then you eventually switched to Amazon in the AWS division, which is a well-known, obviously, division. But what made you go from aviation, and how'd you start there, and why make the change into AWS?
Yeah, for sure. It's a long and winding road, but it was in England. One of the key things that happens is there's not really an MBA culture like there would be in the US. So when you're undergraduate, I did statistics. If you want to get into business or that side of the world, you tend to go to an accounting firm and do your chartered accountancy qualifications. So that's what I did. You do that for 3 years. So I did a mixture of accountancy, audit, and then tax, which was a great grounding. But once you qualify, your name goes in the paper, and recruiters start calling up and try to get you to move because it's a very natural transition point. Some people want to stay and be partner. I was like, that's a path I could go down. But I don't really love the lifestyle that I see. So maybe I'll go into business. I can always go back. So you get a lot of calls about random different things. And I was lucky to get a call from British Airways. So I moved there. I really loved that because I used to like to travel. I actually, used to like the plane spot. So I would go to the Newcastle airport, which is not like Heathrow. It's not a really big airport, and see a couple of planes take off many years ago when I was young. My family used to love that. So it was like a dream come true in some senses to get a job at British Airways and move down. And you can probably see the Concorde perhaps above me. I had the chance to go on Concorde when I worked at British Airways. So really, really good mix of solid professional experience, but also a lot of personal cool stuff that you get to do to fly around the world. Whilst I was British Airways, I happened to go on a business trip to American Airlines to talk about fuel hedging accounting. Met my wife, decided that, I'd watched enough movies and knew how much of a meritocracy that America was. So it was definitely a great idea to kind of quit my successful career at British Airways to go to America. So I did that, ultimately got a job at American Airlines, different sort of setup, right? Different company, different culture. There wasn't a lot going on. Like this is, remember this is like 2005, 6 kind of time. So, still coming off the effects of September the 11th, and the airline industry certainly wasn't growing. There wasn't a ton of opportunity. So I would have really loved to stay in the aviation industry. And every now and again, I keep on trying to get back in. But it just got to the point where there wasn't enough opportunity. And I took a job at a subsidiary of American Airlines, an investment management company, helped them sell that small company, about 80 people, to private equity. Then I took 18 months off looking after my son. My wife wanted to go back to work after we had our son. Flew to the Middle East a bunch of times trying to get a job at the Etihad's, the Qatars. Nothing quite worked out there. And then went to Dublin, Ireland, for a year in the aviation industry. And then when we came back from doing that, I persuaded my wife to get a job in Hawaii. So she got a job on Lanai. If you're familiar with Hawaii, Lanai is a very small island. It's a couple of Four Seasons hotels there. So she got a job in finance there. I looked after my son again, did some consulting work. A big story about why that didn't necessarily work out, but loved the experience. Came back to Texas, and then it's like, oh, I got to get a proper job. Like, I don't think this consultant thing is going to work in the long term. And that's how I got into tech. So I just applied for a job at Amazon. Like, we were going to move to Seattle, interestingly enough, because Boeing's there, Starbucks is there. It felt like there was a good bunch of opportunities. We really liked the sort of the weather, if you can believe that, and like the scenery. So we were.
Well, you're from England, so it's actually
for sure. Yeah. So we were going to proactively move there, and I applied to a job at Amazon and got that. So we didn't have to move to Seattle jobless. We went with the Amazon job.
That's amazing. British Airlines, special place in my heart. I spent some time obviously in East Africa growing up, and so we'd always fly British Airlines going back and forth. That was always the airline, and they were always wonderful. So special place in my heart there. We still fly them, but know the airline well from that experience.
Yeah.
Well, you worked, from the Amazon experience. You went on to work at Meta, Lyft, and then obviously Aurora. I mean, you worked at some of the fastest growing companies, large enterprise companies that you can work with. What was it like to work in such type of companies? Was there a different cultural aspect that you noticed? What was that experience like?
Yeah, no, for sure. It was, very fortunate to have the opportunity to work in all these companies. And one of the cool things about it, I think, is that they're very, very, all very successful, but they're all very different in their own way. So, my experience at Amazon was like you read in the books, I think, super intense. You got a ton of responsibility, right? You were to kind of do everything. Things hadn't been sort of invented yet necessarily. A lot of processes to be built, a lot of people to support, and it was moving very, very quickly. Had still at that time, AWS was smaller, but it still had this sort of Amazon way of doing things, which is genius. And it's really good to kind of go through it. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean it's awesome for all of the employees, but it's fascinating the way that they've built that culture and that infrastructure to be able to, essentially suck as much out of the people as they can. And then when the people move on, get the next set of people and do the same thing. So if you're interested in like organizational structure and how to business and resource management, it's a fascinating masterclass in that, and all due respect for them to make it kind of successful. They also have a heavy focus on data as well, right? Like there'd be a weekly metrics meeting, probably pretty famous, that all of the business units would go to, and then over time it got thicker and thicker and thicker, tiny font, all the information that you could need. And then the business leaders were expected to be able to answer a question on any of the numbers in the deck. So having a sort of a focal point like that focuses all of the activity that happens behind the scenes and make sure that people really understand what's driving their business. And I think that was a super awesome education. You get a Microsoft after that, completely other end of the spectrum. So very kind of very, very much like we're such a sort of a big sprawling company that my experience was the jobs were really chunked down. So there was maybe 10 things that they wanted me to do, and there was 10 things they wanted somebody at the next desk to do. And that's all that you really needed to do. Execute your 10 things. They would both get passed up to somebody else who'd consolidate it, and it would sort of go up the chain like that. That was less fun for me to work in, I think. I'm more used to this sort of roving around, being nosy, turning over things, getting involved in things. And there isn't much of a place for that at Microsoft as there certainly was at Amazon. But again, genius in its own way. And one of the things I remember about that was, it was this realization that, there's the CEO of Microsoft, right? Massive, massive company. They have the same number of hours in the day as like I do or as you do. Yeah. So, what does that mean? Like, and it was the importance of prioritization. So they would pick something to look at. So interesting thing I remember is I was on the infrastructure side, and you can imagine how much it costs to build data centers, fill them with servers, connect them with the network, right? These billions and billions of dollars. And with AI, it's people are becoming more aware of just how expensive building and operating data centers and facilities like that are, GPUs and stuff. But they would meet in every month, and basically they would approve any infrastructure spend above $1 million. And you're like, this is Microsoft, right? Look at the size of the company. What is the CFO doing? Being the final say on $1 million worth of expenditure on infrastructure. But of course, it set the tone, right? Because that's an area which could spiral out of control. Because if you gave people massive spending limits, people would start buying this stuff. Maybe it would work, maybe it wouldn't work. And then suddenly you'd have all of this kind of kit that you'd bought that cost millions and millions of dollars that you were going to get rid of. So that was an interesting thing that I learned from Microsoft. But I didn't love the jobs being kind of chunked down as much. When I went to Facebook was sort of, I would imagine, best is somewhere in the middle. So there was a lot of like leeway to kind of do things. Things hadn't really been invented as much as they had been at Microsoft, maybe less so at Amazon. I think they've been wildly successful. Like they went public, they struggled, then they went to mobile, and then they were wildly successful. Like it's a well-known story. So some of the areas that I was working in, again, on the infrastructure side, were underdeveloped, especially on the finance side. So there was a lot of ability to come in, build those processes, build those partnerships, build those. But culturally, it was much more of a, everyone sort of get by the mission kind of thing, much more so I think than Amazon and Microsoft. Like it was still, we're connecting the world, and it felt like the majority of people were kind of behind that. Now time changes, that sort of facade falls away, doesn't it? Right, and it becomes, oh, we're really an advertising company. And then as time goes on, you're like, oh, I kind of liked it when we were connecting the world, and I wish that we would say we were, and we would just turn around and say like we're an advertising company, and like you'd respect that and you'd know what you were doing. But over the years, it got to this. I felt like a little bit of cognitive dissonance between what was the business was trying to do and what it was trying to communicate to people.
Yeah, going back to it's interesting, like how companies change, unfortunately, from sometimes being really mission driven to we're a business that makes money, and this is how we make it, right?
You need both, right? I mean, I don't think anyone, we're not here at charity, right? Like everyone's in business to make money, whether it be the employees or it be the founders, whether it be the investors, the shareholders. So there's certainly nothing wrong with that. Don't get me wrong, but it's, I think there's ways to be transparent and kind of consistent. And I think that's what gets the best results up and down the chain.
Agreed. At the Amazon days, Bezos talks a lot about even just like the meeting structure. You touched on that a little bit, where he says, look, the meeting size shouldn't be bigger than, I can't put a pizza out there and it feeds everybody, right? Was that true? Do you notice that meeting sizes were relatively small and everyone had input?
Yeah. So I think Amazon is probably the entirety of my career, whereby those like leadership principles and how they did business actually was very, very adhered to, right? People talked about leadership principles. They made decisions based on the leadership principles. So yes, everything around like meeting size, no PowerPoint presentations, right? The 6-page documents, read it before you start the meeting. Like all of that was true, and it was very, very sort of strictly adhered to. And I think if you tried to do something different, like the system would reject you, right? The culture was that strong. Because it kind of came from the top down, and the people who were successful and got promoted and stayed there, they both saw the benefit of how that was being done within Amazon, but also knew that was the way to kind of get ahead, I suspect, as well. But it was very, 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 very well kind of adhered to. As you go through different companies, obviously people go from Amazon outwards, then people hear the success that Amazon have had, and some people try to replicate some of the Amazon ways, but they never seem to stick, and they never seem to be as effective. And it feels like people who just try to copy it without it being like embedded, really, steeping people in the culture, and this is how we do business. You're not going to get the benefits just copying somebody who's been successful doing it.
Yeah, you got to embed it early. You mentioned this, but what Bezos implemented with the reading the memo at the beginning of the meeting, knowing that if you sent the memo out before, no one was going to read it, and then you start the meeting, and no one's actually read the material, and so everyone's it's a mix of who's actually read it.
Yeah,
it's so genius to say we're going to take 3 minutes or whatever it is, 6 minutes, and just read the material. And we're giving you the time so that you actually do it, and then we'll jump into it. How that's so opposite of our culture, right? Of most businesses.
Yeah, like it just. It was when I got there. It was done when I left. It became very natural. The first few times, maybe even all of the time, it can be a bit weird when you're sitting in a room with, senior executives and there's silence, and they're just reading the document and they're scribbling notes, perhaps. So it's always unnerving to a certain extent, I think. But it just became kind of like this is the way we do it, and it did avoid a lot of that. People being on different pages and people coming in with, agendas that they could manipulate the conversation with by kind of getting in first or something like that. Like everyone sort of we should have been coming in at the same lead, read that document, and the documents. There was a lot of work that went into the documents in advance to make sure that they were the right way to kind of get those results as well. It wasn't just a kind of, oh, we'll throw a bunch of slides together and then we'll kind of talk about it and give that context. It was like, no, the documents needed to be written in a way that they stood alone, and that process and that the intellectual horsepower that went into each and every document also helped to make sure that those discussions were sensible. But like I said, like awesome to sort of see some of this and be involved in some of this, especially when like AWS was smaller, because it just kind of shows we can achieve if you care about organization design and care about how business gets done versus just copying what the last person did.
Well, I mean, that's everything that's not talked about. That is the person who does the document. They have to think so much differently and prepare so much better. And it's such a better use of everyone's time because of how much time that person spent, right, getting that meeting ready. And so you got a meeting of 10 really important people. Now that time is so much more well spent because it's so much more well thought of, knowing that person's like, they're going to read every word that I put down. So I got to make this good.
Right. And it's boxed though, right? It can only be 6 pages, and you can have stuff like that, but you don't have you've been able to kind of waffle on and sort of take pages or hide the ball, right? It's like, right, every word counts.
I've been nervous to Jeff, knowing that I'm a slow reader, and then he's done, and I'm only halfway through. So it would feel like elementary school when someone's already done with their test and you're on the second page, right? But it's a great practice. Well, being at those companies, I'm sure you learned a lot. We were talking about that a little bit even before we jumped on the show, of just like the wealth of experience that you have. I'm sure there were certain leaders that you just took so much from. Are there any that really stand out that you really try to emulate some of the things that they did?
Yeah, it's an interesting question actually, because you get exposed to a bunch of people in these successful companies, and you like some things, you don't like other things about people. You get great managers, you get terrible managers, right? It's the full mix, right? Like especially when you've been through so much, it gets long. But in answer to the question, I'd actually go all the way back to British Airways. I think the person who most sort of sticks in my mind and you would like to kind of emulate, or you like the way they did things, was a guy at British Airways called Keith Williams, and he was the treasurer when I was there. So he was in my department. He was the head of the department. So I was like, I didn't report directly to him. I skip level to him. He ultimately went on to be CFO of British Airways, CEO of British Airways, and I'm like, oh, I should have stayed. It's like when you see him do that, he's like,
because you rise
he
up
liked
with
me. I got on well with them. Yeah, he kept rising, and I'd gone over to America, so I was like, kicked myself a few times about what might have been had I stayed. But what I liked about him is like he was a kind of a no kind of guy. He just cared about his people, cared about the business, cared about having good partnerships and wanted to have good relationships with everybody, and certainly didn't think it was all about him, even though he was a head of contribution. A good example would be, banks, when you do deals, there's like this big industry of like these like monuments that kind of come out, right? Like these,
for sure,
what they're like. So you can imagine, right? If you're working in an airline, you're doing some big money deals, you're financing a bunch of aircraft, you're ordering a bunch of aircraft. People want to like create these and send these, and he was just having none of it, right? He's like, it doesn't matter, right? Like, we need to finance the aircraft, we finance the aircraft, like, so what, right? On to the next thing, which is something little like that. But those kind of little things kind of stick with me, and I'm like, yeah, that's the kind of thing, you want to do an awesome job, but you want the work to stand for itself, and you don't need to be going around super cheerleading and look what I had for breakfast kind of thing. Oh, night, awesome. So I really sort of, he's one of the biggest influences, and the people that I kind of like to emulate.
Yeah, the no nonsense is interesting because those are a lot of times your best leaders, right? They are very focused on what really matters, is kind of how I describe it. But it's like a really delicate line of what you said. This person really cared about the business, but the people too. And sometimes I think when you get into the line of the no nonsense people, they don't care about the people. And I think that's the difference, to being a
that's
jerk
fair.
with that title. Yeah, I think that to me is probably what the difference is.
Yeah, so a good example of that would be, so I was younger, I was in my mid-20s, but I was doing very well, and I was talking about something, and I said, oh, I'm going to go to Australia, and British Airways had flight concessions, but they were essentially an economy for the most part. If you're a manager, you could go business class or first class if you were lucky. But I was talking to it's he's like, oh, I think we need to have a meeting with Qantas, which is obviously a partner airline and Australian airline. And I'm like, oh, okay. And he's like, you're going to Australia, aren't you? I'm like, yeah, I'm going to Australia on vacation. I got the train actually from Perth to Sydney. And he's like, okay, well, you should have a meeting with Qantas. So, go talk to Allison, who's his secretary. She'll hook you up with like tickets, right? So now you've got duty tickets. They're like confirmed in first class, which is a pretty big deal going from, Heathrow to Australia, 24 hours or something like that. So I'm like, oh, this is awesome. This is great. Like a day before I'm going, I'm like, well, you haven't told me anything about this meeting that I'm meant to go to. And of course, there wasn't a meeting, right? It was just, he just wanted to do me a solid, right? So that's to your point around, you have to mix the people aspect with the no nonsense aspect. That stuff like that really sticks, right? And then you're very loyal, right? And then what are you not going to do for somebody who has that kind of attitude, right?
Totally. It's the small things like that, and they're not looking for praise from that at all, right? They're only thinking of you, which is so cool. Well, we got to talk about Aurora. I mean, Aurora, I'm sure you just learned so much. I mean, you jumped in at the Series B stage of a really fast-growing self-driving automation company. Can you firstly describe a little bit about Aurora, the company they are, and then you obviously took them public via SPAC, but maybe a little bit about Aurora, where the company was in the beginning, to get kind of that whole experience.
Sure. Yeah. Like a whole series of podcasts probably about Aurora, and I think its journey is still very early, hopefully, right? So I think I joined them June 2020. I'd been at Lyft. One of the things I'd done at Lyft was had responsibility for their finance for their self-driving program, and I think Aurora had raised. I mean, again, this is 2020, right? So they raised an insane $630 million Series B. Didn't have a product yet, so there's no product market fit here, right? This is just people throwing money to kind of solve an interesting problem that hopefully be super valuable in the future. So they did Series B. I think the founder, CEO, Chris Urmson, wanted to professionalize finance, so he went looking for a new finance person. I was probably one of the only people in the world, honestly, who had any exposure to self-driving finances for self-driving vehicle companies. My Lyft experience, and obviously, my background wasn't too shabby before that as well. I talked to him. I didn't really know anything about self-driving, but it sounded kind of interesting, and it felt like an opportunity that was too good to turn down. Right? When did these opportunities come along? I didn't know whether it was going to be successful. Like, was it going to run out of money in a year? Is it going to, be wildly successful? Is it going to get sold? It didn't seem to matter. I felt like I'd learn enough to do that versus sort of staying at Lyft. It turned out really well. So, but what was Aurora? So Aurora was a sort of self-driving vehicle company. Chris had been the person, he's sort of a luminary in the industry. Some people call him like the godfather of self-driving. So he had been hired by Google to start Google's self-driving program, which subsequently became Waymo. He'd been there maybe 6 or 7 years, decided that he wanted to do something different. So took a step back, talked to a bunch of people, and then kind of came to the conclusion that there was money available, and it was sort of a better way to do self-driving, like call it self-driving 2.0. And the idea of Aurora, what we're going to do is what we're good at, which is building the driver. So we're going to build the hardware, the software, and the data services that sit around that to allow essentially any vehicle to drive itself in the world, whether it be passenger vehicles, whether it be Class 8 trucks, light goods vehicles. So that was the focus of the company. And in order to be successful doing that, there was a realization that you couldn't do everything yourself. Like, you shouldn't build a car. There's plenty of people who can build a car, plenty of people who can build a truck who've been doing it for 100 years very successfully. Why would you do that yourself? Instead, you need to partner with them. Same with the shippers, right? Do you want to really create a freight network? Well, a FedEx, a UPS, like these shipping companies have been doing it for 100 years. They're very successful. Yeah. They have the networks. Why do we need to recreate the wheel? So let's focus on what we do best, which is building that hardware, software, data services around it, and partner with all of these other people to kind of get it done. So that was sort of the focus of the company. The product they were trying to work on was the Aurora driver, which was that driver that drove the vehicles. So I joined. Fantastic experience. Crazy technology development going on. There was like 6 people in finance, so we had to build the finance team. The business had to do what the business was doing, and then we went through this like really sort of accelerated trajectory. So, when you join, you're like, okay, we'll have a couple of years and then we'll raise some more money and then we'll see what progress we've made and we'll keep on doing the same thing. And then 6 months into it, January 2021, we acquired Uber self-driving business. So we added 900 plus people to our 500 people at the time in the middle of COVID. Just super, super kind of interesting. And that was like, all right, like Uber had decided, Lyft had similarly decided and ultimately got rid of their self-driving program that, having it in-house wasn't really the right answer. Like if you were on your own path to profitability, can you really fund a self-driving effort that will pay off down the road? So we were able to acquire Uber self-driving business, and that really kind of propelled us to the ranks of one of the bigger players in self-driving. And it's a people problem at the end of the day, people and capital essentially. So now we had a similar number of people to Waymo and Cruise, had a bunch of capital on the balance sheet, which sort of put you up there, gave you the to sort of succeed. Relative to some of the smaller companies who ultimately didn't make it. But early 2021, you now have a much bigger company, you have much bigger cash burn. So we needed to go out and raise money. We would have needed to as an independent company. We would have, we needed it as a joint company. So we went out, we started talking to people. People were very interested in giving us money, but the size of the checks that people could write weren't going to be that interesting, even if you added them all up.
This was traditional venture.
What would it be in a Series C, right? Like,
right.
Again, like the product was still under development, so there was no revenue. Kind of meant probably to do a private round, but you couldn't raise the quantum of capital that was necessary at the time. So that sort of pushed you towards the public options. Now, given experience that I had at Lyft and to a lesser extent Facebook, I'd seen the problems and the issues that happen if you don't build the company with the right infrastructure on the finance side, the right systems, the right tools that are being audited to allow you to have the flexibility to decide what you need to do. Like Lyft went public. I joined them the day after they went public, but there was a lot of catching up to do about things that could have probably been done better in the past. So I didn't want that to happen at Aurora. So we were in a really, really strong position. And we ultimately, back and forward, decided that, let's do a SPAC because this is the best way to get a bunch of capital on the balance sheet. We could have done a traditional IPO, but we didn't have the 12 to 18, 24 months, whatever it would take to kind of get a traditional IPO done. So we did a SPAC. We did a SPAC differently to other people, we like to think. So we went out ourselves and raised $1 billion in the pipe. We priced the deal, and then we took $1 billion price deal to the SPACs and said, "Hey, you play with us. This is kind of what we're bringing to the table," and that gave us much more leverage. So we were able to change the economics for the benefit of us. So the SPAC still made a lot of money, but not like an obscene amount of money like you saw in some cases. And November 2021, we were listed on the NASDAQ. I think we had $11 billion valuation when we went public, and ultimately raised $1.2 billion gross, which is fantastic. Now we're a public company, don't have a product yet, don't have any revenue yet. So that's an interesting journey as a CFO to kind of tell the company's story about what the future is going to look like. Obviously, we've built great partnerships with OEMs, great partnerships with pilot customers, and the business kept on moving on that front. Behind the scene, finance kept on building the team. We didn't raise as much money as we'd like to. Obviously, one of the issues with SPACs is you can get redemptions at the end. And late 2021, the boom was probably over, so redemptions were really, really high for everybody. So we needed more money, but the markets turned, which meant that you couldn't go do a follow-on straight away. So we went through a period of cost optimization, took out hundreds of millions of dollars from the 3-year plan, and kept on, and it was and then also left in August, the end of August 2023, and just before that we raised another $800 million to kind of top up the balance sheet. So really, really, really interesting. And that by that time, the finance team had grown to 27 from the 6 that were there at the start. I'd also taken on responsibility for real estate and facilities, corporate IT, corporate security. I had corporate strategy for a while. So just like all this other cool stuff that I got to see, which you don't get the opportunity to do in a bigger company as well. So you get that CFO experience, you get outward facing things, the relationship building, talking to Wall Street, talking to the analysts, but then some of that kind of operational stuff inside as well. So super fantastic experience.
There's so much to dig into there, but to start with, I mean, how wild to take a company public with no revenue? essentially, right? From your previous
Yeah.
experiences where, you're working at
Right.
large companies, there's a lot of top line revenue and you have expenses. You have
Yeah.
a, soon to be product that has big promise in the world. Clearly that's where things are going with, a founder who, like you said, is the
Yeah.
godfather. And so
Yeah.
obviously a lot of money, knows this is where the industry is going and this is the right team. But to go public with
Right.
no revenue in
Right.
today's market, like, doesn't happen probably, right?
Right.
But
Yeah.
back
I
in
think that's right.
21, it was possible.
It was possible, and it required a good story. It required a good financial model, but I think it was like a product of the times, right?
Yeah.
And it's I think people look back on it and be like, wow, that was kind of super crazy. And like other companies did it, right? Simple was another self-driving company that actually it did an IPO and it did it first. They're no longer around in the US anyway. I think they are in China. Company called Embark sort of followed us, did a SPAC, but were very significantly smaller, and they sort of didn't make it either. And there's a bunch of companies who are sort of still trying to do it, different circumstances, perhaps from a private perspective. But yeah, it's kind
How
of
hard is
crazy.
it though to build the models, right? I mean, it's a little easier when you have some revenue and you can kind of make some future projections, but you're making models with zero revenue.
Yeah, I mean, it's very easy from the cost side, right? Like how many people you have a sense of how many people the business thinks it needs to progress. But one of the things that we did, we like to think that we went public with a bunch of integrity and we didn't kind of make up nonsense. So our financial model was built up from it was tops down and bottoms up at the same time. So there's a tendency to do the easy thing, which is to say, oh, take trucking, right? So we're focused on the trucking market first in the US. Massive, massive market. It's really easy to say like, oh, take this massive TAM and just make small percentages of this TAM that you think that you can address and that you can capture. And that actually ends up with a really large number for revenue. And if that's all that you do, you can end up with these like have no sort of semblance to reality.
Right.
Let's
If
say.
we get 5% of the total addressable market, we're
Yeah.
doing pretty well. Those kind
Yeah.
of projections. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We didn't do it like that. What we did is we said, look, here's the freight network in the US. This is where goods are moving. This is where trucks are moving today. Let's essentially pick the lanes where we think we're going to operate our product and service on first. And then so like the first launch lane that got announced was Dallas to Houston. So how many trucks are on Dallas to Houston now. So you can say, well, if we had, say, 20 trucks operating, we would take a percentage of that one single route, and it wouldn't be ridiculous, and it wouldn't require that route to double, and it wouldn't require us to take 150% of the capacity or anything like that. So we actually had this really mapped out, this lane, this lane, this lane. So this allowed us to have a much more view, which said, all right, maybe we launched, and this is all public, right? Because we did the S4 and we had the financial model there. So 20 trucks at the end of the first year that we launched, and then you don't have any of these kind of crazy horn. So I think that's how you do the model, right? You're like, what do I have to believe? How do I ground this in reality? Versus let's hit the easy button and let's try to tell a part of that's because you don't want to be held like 2-3 years down the line, right? Like everything changes when you're a public company.
Up for failure if you do that.
Yeah. And how do you explain like, oh, it's going to be we have zero? I mean, that's not, you don't really strike. Your credibility isn't great.
It's the same problem that people are having in the private markets now, right? Where they raised a crazy Series A, B valuations and can't grow into the next valuation that they need to raise the Series B or C.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And it's interesting, right? Because you can see how people get into that situation because it's really tempting to take the big check. And sometimes people can get, the bright flashing lights of the big valuation make everybody feel good. And, maybe some of the earlier investors like it as well. But it takes a kind of discipline and a lot of great advice and a lot of experience to be able to say, hey, like, yes, I see why you like that, but no, you're going to have a much easier go of it if you can be a bit more conservative and really go into it and demonstrate what you're up to.
How is that like internally though? Because I'm sure those are not easy conversations because you have people to build a business that you are building that have really ambitious, big, minded people that are thinking big to say, let's temper this down a little bit. This is not sustainable. We need to do this smart. Were those hard conversations to have?
Aurora was a little, because If the times that people raised capital, the check size was always big. So it wasn't, those kind of conversations didn't happen in the same way that I think they're happening today for kind of startups. Um, there was, there was, there was always this, if you get it right and if you're successful, it should be such a valuable company that dilution along the way sort of sucks, but it's not like the end of the world, right? A tiny fraction of a super ginormous company is probably more, well, certainly zero of a smaller company. But I think it was like a lot of pragmatism and practicality and an understanding that this was a highly capital intensive business, especially because there wasn't any. But I think everybody around the table internally, in particular, was aligned that this conservative approach, this like growing into it, is the right answer, because I think they'd all done this kind of stuff before. It wasn't their first rodeo. They spent many years in the business and they understood like how there was a promise of self-driving and it never really materialized. And this is like the sort of the second wave. And I don't think anybody wanted to fall in that trap of over promising. So it wasn't controversial thing. It was just, this is what we're doing, how we are. So I think that's how I experienced it anyway.
You hadn't taken a company public prior to that, and we always talk about I've talked with founders and leaders who've said if people knew my story, I'd probably be fired because they would see how much little I knew.
Yeah.
How did you learn on the job like that? Like, what is the practical steps you're taking to figure things out?
But I mean, there's a whole stream of things, right? If you join a company, it's people in finance. There's a lot of stuff. You basically building from the ground up. And I think if I look back on it, like, wow, we did a lot of stuff. But when you're in the middle of it, it just seemed like do the next thing, do the next thing, do the next. And part of it was because of the experience across all of those big tech companies, airlines, some smaller companies along the way, and also the fact that I kind of grown up in finance. So I didn't go to Wall Street and then, I want and come with like that Wall Street experience, but not, this is how you build a company. This is what a good finance department looks like. Because I'd essentially grown up in finance through my whole life. I could do the journal entries if I needed to, right? Like I understood what a financial system needs to look like, what reports it needs. Basically any job that was getting done in the department, I could do it. Maybe I'd done it in the past, but I certainly could do it. So I think that kind of grounding helps. And you sort of take all of these experiences and then you bring them to bear. You've along the way seen good, seen bad, had a point of view about what you would do if you were in charge, and now you're in charge. So once you get over the fact that, like, yes, you're in charge and there's nobody sort of second guessing what you're up to, and it's up to you to make those calls and set that direction, then you have the freedom to be off to the races. But it was very much like, do the next thing, do the next thing, do the next thing. Of course, you can't do it yourself. So one of the keys to success is, what's the team that you can build around you? What have they seen, right? Do they compliment you? Do they just say that you're awesome and, say yes to everything that you do? Hopefully not. A little bit of that's nice, obviously, right? I mean, everybody likes people to say yes to their great ideas. Yeah. But it can't be much of it. So that was it. I focused a lot on building a really good team, diverse set of experiences, who I knew could see the future, do some of the thing, could see where we were trying to get to, but weren't averse to sitting and getting into the weeds today. So that combination of like bunch of experience, bunch of great people, and then good advice, right? Like if you're going to go through a transaction, you're not the first company that's ever gone public. It might be the first time I've done it, right? It's probably the first time many of the people in the company have done it, but I've done it before. There's other people that kind of help out. And if you're able to take their advice, put your own spin on it, just blindly follow what they're saying, you get to the end of it and you look back at it and you're like, oh, we did it. And then you sort of take a breath and you're like, oh, that was actually really a lot of work and it was absolutely crazy, but we did it very, very seamlessly, honestly. Partly because of the preparation, partly just because of the quality of the people in the team, partly because we held ourselves to high standards along the way and made sure that we hit all our deadlines. And then you're like, oh, we're a public company. Like, it's in a weird way, it doesn't feel like you've killed yourself, but
million
did.
steps, right? You just take
Yeah.
the next step,
Next
and all of a
one, the
sudden you're at
next
the
one, the
top of the
next one.
mountain,
Right, right, right.
and you've reached the destination. Yeah, I can know what that period was like. And talk a little bit about that, because when you're in that kind of environment, you buy Uber's self-driving division, and then you go public via SPAC. Your life is crazy, right? I mean, there's just one huge thing after another, and it takes an intense amount of focus and work to do this. What was it really like even on the personal side of things? I think it's important to share that, right? Of
Right.
what was your life like? Like how many hours were you for how
Yeah.
long? Like, what was that really like?
I mean, that's all you would do. And I think, right, let's tell the truth. You were pretty much just working, working, probably not doing anything else except working, sort of going home, saying hi to everybody, but not really doing a lot of stuff. Like there's no vacations, right? There's no, there's no kind of rest. It's sort of nonstop work with other things kind of splattered in. And I think that's okay. I think if I look back through my career, that's probably something that I'm relatively comfortable with. Um, or I always fall into the same patterns, right? Like it's easy to say like, oh, this time it'll be different, but it isn't, right? Like, I think there's a natural amount of work or effort that you're going to put in, and I think over time you get comfortable with that. My mom says, oh, should be a teacher. You'd be a great teacher. I'm like, yeah, I would be a great teacher, but I wouldn't work any less. So being a teacher wouldn't like stop me from working as much. I would just get paid way less, because
it's in your DNA.
yeah, exactly. So I think that's helpful, but then you sort of have to. So I don't know that you need balance on like a day-to-day basis, and I think perhaps if you try to do that, especially in something like a startup, especially if you're going through some of these really big transitions, like you're doing this big mergers and acquisitions deal, you go public, like saying like, oh, I could from like 9 to 5 and have the weekends off and then take a 2-week vacation. The process, like, this is probably unrealistic, right? You're probably not really going to get where you want to go, as we did anyway, with that kind of attitude. And I think there's probably a need to kind of have more of a peaks and valleys kind of approach to things, which is like, all right, push through this, overweight the work aspects of things, and then hopefully you get enough out of it on the back end that it was worth it, and then maybe you find your balance on the other side of it. And that's probably what I would, if somebody asked me for my advice, to be probably a bit more articulate than that, but I think that's it.
Yeah, I think it's important to be honest about it, right? You can, like you said, take a company public while checking out at 5 and not looking at emails again until 8 a.m. the next day, right? We just have to be a little bit honest. One of the Netflix founder, not Reed, I'm forgetting the of our founder's name, but he said he was very intentional about doing date night every week. And he would leave the office no matter what the fire was. He just had to leave. And I always thought that was kind of strange that he almost needed that every week. I thought that was kind of a lot, but you realize it's because of all the intensity in the other days. And he was setting aside a time to be really intentional, where that was the focus. And that's what I think you talked about, is it's not this balance, everything's even every day. It's really off some days. And so then he tries to get it back a different day. Right. I think I think that's the key.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that maybe you sort of learn that more over time, because if you do something like that, you have a chance to protect that time. Whereas if you're like, oh, I'll do something on Friday, you can absolutely guarantee that Friday will come around and there's other things to do. And if you haven't sort of made that bargain with yourself and you're not going to keep it, then the time will just get sucked up to something else. Because if you don't do the thing that came up, you're going to have to do that at time. And then the thing that came up after that, you're going to have to do as well. So I think that if you can find those little things and you can stick to them, that would make more sense and probably be more successful. But I do think, like, if you want to sort of play in the big leagues, maybe, right? Whatever you want, right? You want to play in the big leagues. You want to get some of these really career defining things done. Like, you really want to make a mark in the world. You probably have to sacrifice a lot, and you might have to get your having a break, after you've done that tour of duty or like that. I don't know.
Well, you did say earlier, you touched on, you took a little bit of a break in your career to be a parent, be a full-time parent.
Yep.
What was that like, right? Because that time
Yep.
off from your career and then re-enter. Is that true? Was that pretty hard to re-enter the workforce?
Yeah, I think it's harder than people probably think, and it's probably why some people do it. Like, I'm really pleased that I did it, but I probably didn't fully grasp, grasp the implications, shall we say? And I suspect, like, in an alternate universe where you didn't do that, like, you would be in a different place, perhaps. Maybe it'd be better, maybe it'd be worse, but like probably being more sort of like in some senses. And that's for kind of a lot of reasons, right? Like, one reason would be it's still very unusual, right? Especially for guys. Like, sure, you get like maternity leave, paternity leave. That's much more prevalent now, and it can be, you know, up 4, 5, 6 months, right? Depends what company you're lucky enough to be at, and people take advantage of that, but they take advantage of it in different ways. But you know what you sort of coming back to, right? At least you come back to the company, probably the same role. Just kind of saying like, thanks, I'm done, right? Like, I'm walking away and I don't have a job. And I did that. Like, I would be like, whenever I want to go back, it'll be pretty straightforward. I'll just kind of, walk into something. It was much harder than that to try to fix thing. Partly because at the time, this is like what, 2006 ish, was it? Oh, sorry, no, 2009.
Yeah,
2009 kind of
in a
time.
great spot.
Yeah, I mean, the economy's not in a great spot, like, and it's unusual, right? Like, people are not used to dads saying like, oh yeah, my wife want to go back to work. I just kind of looked at my son 18 months. They're like scratching their heads and like, okay, like,
They're probably
what does
questioning,
that
right?
mean?
Right?
Yeah,
Like, do you want to work? Right? They're not thinking maybe you wanted it spend with your kid
yeah,
and give your
yeah,
wife
yeah,
that time to go to work.
right. So that, I think that kind of played it. And I was in Texas, and I did MBA, and I didn't have like a strong, network of things like that. So that probably kind of contributed to the challenges as well. And ultimately, I did them in Texas, right? Like, I found one in Ireland, and we moved to Dublin. But I wouldn't give the time. I wouldn't change the decision, right? Like, it was like a kind of an awesome time, and it changes your relationship with the family for sure. But career trajectory wise, it certainly puts the zigs and zags in it versus the do the next thing, do the next thing, do the next thing. But had I been being wildly successful at American Airlines, right? Because I'd moved over to America, probably I wouldn't have done it, right? It's partly I felt the ability to do it because my wife was earning the same amount as I was. It was relatively cheap where we were living, so you had the ability to kind of go down to one income. And if we were getting paid the same, it wasn't a lifestyle change that was terrible. But had I been sort of high flying at American or something like that, I doubt it. I would have made the same decision.
You probably couldn't have done it.
Right.
Zags. One thing that's interesting, kind of look at your career is, some stints at companies were longer than others, were some longer term ones. What do you think is the right balance there? There's some people who argue like once you're there for a year or two, you take that knowledge, you go to the next company, you go to the next ladder, and it gets you up faster. And others say, like, I've had some on the show that said, look, I've actually tried to get to the point of the knowledge, and then now I'm adding value, and that's where really the magic happens. And then maybe I'll leave, a few years after. What do you think is best?
Oh goodness, I don't think there's one right answer. I think it's very, very circumstantial and very, very to individuals. What do I think? So if I look at my journey, I would say I've never joined somewhere I'm only going to stay for a year, for example, right? Like, it's almost like, okay, I'm going to join this company because it feels like it's a great opportunity and I could see myself staying here for the rest of my career, which sounds silly when you sort of look back in retrospect, but that's kind of the approach I take when I go into it. Earlier in my career, I felt like the world was coin operated, right? You're still naive. You work a bit harder than everybody else. You put in the time, you put in the effort, you get the rewards out. It sort of follows on from school and university, right? So that was kind of how things were working all the way through British Airways. Even so I had this naive that you just work a bit harder, you're going to get the rewards, and you're always going to you get in the companies, like you're getting a new opportunity every year, 18 months anyway, right? Naturally, right? You're getting promoted, you're getting moved around a little bit, so you just think that's how the world works. So you go to American Airlines, like, oh my word, like what happened here? Like, you hit reality, you're like, and you don't understand it, right? Because you're like, well, this has worked for 10 years all the way through them at school. Like, what happened? And so that kind of wakes you up a little bit. And you're like, well, I was in a role for 18 months, and like I probably learned the first 2 months, and then that was it. And then I'm just not, the company's fine, it's getting done what needs to get done in that role, but I'm not really learning anything. So, once I went, I looked after my son, came back to Ireland, and then in Ireland, I ended up in this really great role, but I ended up doing like 2 years of work in a year because the company needed to get sold. And that was a very sort of stressful time. And, my hair started going gray, like a whole story around that. But what I took, and then when I finished the project, they're like, well, I don't know what you're going to do next. Like if we get sold, like there might not be a role for you. And I'm like, oh my word. Right. But this sort of really changes the dynamic or the thought process around what the balance needs to look like. So ever since then, from when I was at Amazon onwards, I was much more kind of attuned to this kind of, I'm going to give a lot, but I'm going to expect the company to get a lot. And when that balance breaks and the company's getting a lot, but I'm not getting any more, and that's a combination of professional experience, it's a combination of compensation. When that balance is broken, then there's not a lot of point in sticking around. And that's kind of why some of these stints are shorter than others. Like Amazon was sort of 80 months. I learned a lot, but then it became clear that
the balance are broken.
The balance are broken.
Yeah.
Microsoft, the balance broke really quickly. Facebook, I was like, oh, I could stay here for the rest of my career probably, but I think I can do more. Went to Lyft, and then the opportunity to join Aurora came at Lyft after a year, and it's like, oh, they like me, I like them. Do I really want to leave? And you're like, well, when's this opportunity going to come around again? And then at Aurora, you're like, well, look at all the stuff that we've done in 3.5 years, and then look at where the business is. Again, what are you going to learn in the next year? What are you in the next 2 years? And what's that relative to what you could do on somewhere else?
Yeah, Steve Jobs talks.
So there's no right answer, I guess. That's the thing. But I think you have to be intentional, and you have to have a point of view yourself. And if you it's one of these things where I think if you listen to advice too much, that advice is coming from a place where perhaps a person was successful because they went down a specific path, and it's unclear that specific path that person went down would apply to anyone else's situation. So people could look at me, they could follow my advice and have a terrible outcome. So
yeah, you got to be pretty discerning. We're getting kind of towards the end, but I do want to touch on a few kind of career questions for you, as well as some of the CFO roles. You worked as you scaled. As from a CFO standpoint, what are like the key things to get right in a scaling company?
So I think a lot of things, obviously you can imagine, but infrastructure, like let's call it infrastructure, right? Like the basics, the blocking and tackling. Like you don't necessarily have to do all of that yourself, but you have to make sure that you can get the books closed, that you have robust financial systems, that you have documented processes and things like that. So I think that's super key. I think it's important that you get the accounts audited by the right kind of people at the right kind of time, because if you're going to be successful, like if you don't do that, or you defer that, or you think it's not important, it's going to come back and bite you, and it's going to be super painful rather than doing it earlier. So those things are key. The team that you build, obviously, exceptionally important. Like, are you able to attract, recruit, motivate a really, really good bunch of people? And then can you assist them or by, if you're going to, if you're good enough to work for me, you're good enough to work anywhere. That's what I want. So people are going to move on, and that can't be the end of the world, right? Like you can't be so reliant on somebody that when they get a better opportunity, or they decide they don't want to work with you anymore and they go somewhere else, the world ends. So you need to have that bench, you need to have that solid team up and down. But I think that's important. And then your relationship with other people in the company, whether it be executives, whether it be people lower down, I think that's important. And then understanding like what finance's place needs to be in any given company, because different companies need different things from finance. And then the last thing would be, can you represent the company externally? Becomes more important, I think, over time, especially when you're public, and you have a bunch of relationships that you have to maintain. And some people probably don't like doing that. Some people probably aren't very good at that, and that I think is going to impact their success. Going to dinner with the bankers, talking to the analysts, keeping them engaged, keeping them interested, having them want to pick up the phone when you or your investor relations team call, super important.
One thing that you said earlier too, that I do want to expand on now, is you talked about we have the same hours in the day, right? And some people seem to have a lot more, and they're just way more productive and get meaningful things done. You've been on some high performing teams. What do you think that is? What do those people get right? Like, what are the best of the best? Why does it seem like they have so many hours in the day? What is it that they're doing?
I don't know that I fully know the answer to that. I suspect that they have a high a high bar for prioritization and like really
Mm.
being able to focus on the things that matter. And maybe that's because they have like people who help them. Maybe they have had good role models in the past. The EAs are very kind of protective of the time, but I think most people would probably resonate with the fact that it's easy to get sucked into things that aren't really that important, but they're easy, or you enjoy them, or it defers having to think really hard. Like, you know, maybe it gets to the end of the day and you're tired, so you know you defer doing something that actually matters to, you know, send a bunch of emails that don't really matter in the big scheme of things. So my suspicion is that the people who are really successful and look like that are sort of very good at ruthless prioritization, and you know, probably some kind of support mechanisms around them that allows it to be easier, even if it's not obvious up front.
Yeah, I think that's well said. The prioritization. It's not like they're moving so much faster or something. It's what they're focusing on that's most important, high value. In your career, you know, to kind of what you got today, a really successful career, working in a lot of amazing companies, taking Aurora public, and still a lot is unwritten, right?
Right.
What do you
Hopefully.
think was if you had to put the blueprint for your success, if you had to put it down to a couple things, what would you put it down to?
Yeah. So I think probably technical competence. I think that underlies everything. Um, Ability to build relationships, communicate well to anybody, right? You know, the most junior person just starting their career, people in sort of the helping the service sort of side of the business, the, you know, traditionally like janitors and things like that, all the way through to executives, and then also internally and externally. So that matters. And then, you know, people management and the full spectrum of people management. Can you attract people? Can you retain them? Can you help them develop their careers? I think that those three things, and then like just an overriding sense of kind of curiosity and interest and very high standards, right, for myself and then for others. It's probably five things maybe.
Yeah,
There's probably
yeah,
more, but I think that, you know, everything probably falls within the buckets.
I love that. Uh, you're now at Coast Institute. You know, tell us a little bit about, you know, after you left Aurora. You know, what are you thinking for the future? Coast is obviously not a. It sounds like it's not a full time thing. But tell us a little bit about what you're doing and kind of what the future holds for you.
Yeah, so you know, we spoke about this earlier, right? Like it's you give everything to it for a certain period of time, and that's certainly what Aurora was. Don't have any vacation, really. You know, you're traveling around the country, going to the different offices. You're just fully focused on Aurora. So you know, once you take a step back from that, you know, you have a little bit of a break. You catch up on some of that time, and then it also opens up this spectrum of, you know, time and brain power and all that kind of stuff to talk to a bunch of different people. So you know, I've been talking to a bunch of different companies about what might be next. Big companies, small companies, various different, you know, CFO roles and things like that. And you know, haven't found, you know, as we talk now, right? Haven't found the thing that is the next best thing. And like, you know, as you're successful and if you see things, the bar for what you want to do and where you think be interested and where you can contribute sort of does get higher, right? Um, so yeah, you know, you haven't found like that next permanent thing that is probably where I'm going to end up, what I'm end up going to do. But as you go through that, you talk to a bunch of different founders, you talk to a bunch of interesting people, and an interesting thing that I came across was Coast Institute, which is a bunch of very, you know, experienced people, you know, 6 7 people working on AI pattern matching kind of discovery sort of software. Really, really interesting. Like everyone's been around the block. No one has the desire to try to build a, like, you know, unicorn SaaS company, but kind of want to use the rec to, you know, build something that's useful and then maybe sell that as a one time thing. So that they were interesting people. They were working on an interesting problem. I came on board to sort of help them out in the CFO role, and that's something that, you know, I can continue, and we will see what I want to do next. But I don't have I've done a lot of stuff in my career, right? Like you know, airlines, self-driving, all the tech companies, right? Like I pick things up really, really quickly. So I don't have a like a super,
Yeah.
and finance is one of those beneficial things where you can adapt that to many different things. So high bar of something interesting that's meaningful and, you know, hopefully can be successful financially as well as professionally.
Yeah, I love that. Very, very high bar. Last couple questions. What's your what's a favorite book of yours?
Favorite book? It's a really hard question. I tend to like
Hard to
read
narrow.
them. Yeah, and then I read them and take out of what I want and sort of move on to the next one. So I wouldn't actually say I have a favorite book. I would say instead, there's a magazine called Monocle, like a sort of a periodical comes out, which is sort of covers like kind of travel and has like a global outlook. That's really, really, really good. And I would highly recommend people look into that and the stay do. And you're like, I wish I had more time, wish I had more money, because I would just go and do all the stuff that they have in their magazine. So
But then your DNA, you'd be ready to work. It's a hard balance.
yeah, this is I don't know. Yeah, exactly. Would you? How much money do you need before you can really say like I don't need it? But I think you're right. Like I think you talk to people, whether it be a family, whether it be people that you work with, and they're like, yeah, you would always find something to do, right? Like it's like, what would you do if you win the lottery? All those conversations, you'd
You'd build
find a way to
something.
be
You'd work.
useful, right? Like you got to
Right.
keep your brain. You just
For
have more
sure.
flexibility and less need to rely on others. But I think you'd always find something to spend your.
Well, as we wrap up, any parting advice that you'd leave the audience?
I think from a sort of a career perspective, I think it's important for people to understand what they really want and do that kind of introspection. I was involved in this mentoring program actually, and I had a good conversation over a period of time with someone, and I think that kind of introspection is super important, because people often see the outside and they're like, oh, I want to be a CFO. Okay, why do you want to be a CFO? Well, I'm in finance. I want to be a CFO, and that's not enough, right? Like, you really have to understand why you'd want to be a CFO, and yeah, that might be the answer. And then you can build a career or build a set of decisions off the back of that and try to build that experience. Or you might be like, well, the things that you have to do as a CFO, I'd hate. So like, well, why are you spending your life trying to go down that path? So I think the sort of the introspection around what you're good at and what you actually want to be doing to spend your time with is super important, and applies to finance, probably applies to other careers as well. And then be to a certain extent like selfish, right? Like, don't listen to others. Like, how many times have you been in conversations with people where they're saying like, oh, stick around for another 6 months and I'll promote you. 6 months comes around and like something happens or they don't do it. It's like, just make sure that you're the balance is there, right? And you're sort of selfish where you need to be selfish.
You said that well earlier too, of the selfishness piece of that balance. The incentives need to be aligned between you and the company. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense to be there. And that's where I think that selfishness, as I've been taught by great executives, is like it's got to align the incentive, and when it doesn't, you got to figure something else out.
And on the flip side, when you are the executive or you're that manager, right? You have to make sure that balance is there for your employees, and if it's not for whatever reason, like, company might not have the ability to promote somebody or give somebody the responsibility they need, and you have to have the ability to say, for the benefit of you, you should go do something else, and let me help you let me help you do that. Not pretend that there's going to be a magical outcome if you stick around just to make my life easier. Like, it's terrible.
Yeah. Some of the best managers I've spoken to, they've said, I've told some of my best people, like, you shouldn't be here anymore. Like, there's not a right position for you anymore. Like, you're doing a great job, but you're going to go crazy here. And that's not good for either of us.
It's cool. You see all your people who've been, they're in different roles now, and everybody, like, whether it be Aurora or other places who've worked for you, they've all gone on to bigger and better things. And you're like, that's really cool. And you build this network, and you can say like, I influenced these people's careers in the same way that other people influence mine. And I think that's one of the best parts of being a manager, right?
Absolutely. Well, it's such a fascinating interview. So much wisdom here. How do people get a hold of you? I think you're even doing some consulting on Get Intro. Is it .com,
Yep.
.io?
Yeah, that's right. So I think on LinkedIn, that's probably the easiest way to find me. And I'm on X to a lesser extent. I think when when you've been a public company CFO, it's hard to know where the line is with the SEC and things like that. So not super active, but I'm certainly there as well. And then Intros, I think, a relatively new platform that started that allows people to kind of do consulting, and you can do it in like 15-minute segments as well. So it's not like big long-term kind of commitment, but if you have a question that you need answered or want to dig into some of the advice or opinions, then that's a good place to find me. So yeah, I think it's getintro.com, you're right, or intro.com, and I think just /Richard Tame. But it would be pretty easy to find.
We'll make sure to share the link as
Thanks.
well as your LinkedIn so people get a hold. So Richard, thank you so much for taking the time. This was a fun conversation and really excited to see what you do next.
Well, I really appreciate it, Matt. Thank you very much. It seems like you've got a great podcast here, and I'm sure you have a bunch of fun talking to all these different people and all their different opinions. But I certainly enjoyed myself, and I thank you very much indeed for having me on.
Thanks for saying that. Take care, Richard. Hey, thanks for listening to the latest episode of The Executive. If you like that interview and want to listen to others, feel free to subscribe below, smash the like button, and you can also subscribe to our weekly emails at executive.io, where we send every Friday the weekly takeaways from all the executives that we interview. Thanks again, and can't wait to be joined by you next time.